All right, so I'm bringing this shadow in. This is what it looks like without the shadow. This is what it looks like with the shadow. This is what it looks like with the rock in front, with the shadow behind. But the problem is the shadow's too dark, and I've only blurred it enough using Gaussian blur so that the edges around the foot are a little bit more believable. You see that little shadow there, getting softer and softer as it goes. So how do I make it softer and softer as it goes? Well, what I do is I'm on the shadow layer. I select the edges of it as it pulls away from him. I select around it, and then I do a Gaussian blur again, and it will double it up just to where I selected. And then at the far edges of it, as he's really pulled away, I do it again. And again. And I'm just softening and softening, because that's what happens to shadows, cast shadows, as they pull away. Now, of course, I can use opacity and apply that shadow to that setting. Let's see it with the rock in front. Let's clean up that rock a little bit by erasing out the parts that don't belong there. And we have a shadow that helps set him into place. Now we have to start worrying about the color. And the first thing you can think of is the color of the shadow. Because this is such warm light, the shadows are cool. My shadow is just gray. So now I can take my shadow at its low opacity, and I can go to image adjustments and hue saturation, which we haven't used too much. We've used color balance, but we haven't used hue saturation. When we want to add color to something that doesn't have color, we have to click colorize. And then we are able to give it a color, even if it's subtle, by lightening up that black a little, giving it quite a bit of saturation. Right now it's kind of a greenish blue. I can make it a red shadow, I can make it a purple shadow, but what I want is the slightly cooler shadow that I see behind. About there. All right. Now I play with opacity. And now the problem with shadows is it's not like this is on a flat table where I'm going to get a perfect cutout of him. It's a shadow creeping over all this varied terrain. So now I just use my regular tricks of erasing, using a soft-edged eraser, fairly large, varying opacities. But I can bite away from the shadow, shape it a little bit, make this a little more subtle. So it feels more believably pulling across this terrain. And then there's that little area of the rock, which should also be in shadow too from him. So how do I take care of that? First, let me trim this rock a little bit. Well, now this is a cool new trick. I'm going to dodge and burn the background to help that shadow work. Right. I'm going to burn it right there, but I don't want to actually affect the background. I want to affect everything underneath, but I don't want to actually, ruin my background with shadows from my character. So I don't want to affect those pixels directly. So what we're going to do is what's called an overlay layer. So I go one layer underneath my shadow, which happens to be these rocks here, and I make a new blank layer on top of them using that post-it note icon. And then I'm going to fill it in with middle gray at 100% normal. Right? It shows me what my shadow looks like. My shadow's pretty funky looking now. I might use this opportunity to blur it a little bit. Now I'm on my shadow layer, and I can use the blur tool in particular to pull it out. I could even clone stamp and extend it. But what I basically want to do is I want to burn in around it and make it better. So I go to this layer behind, which is gray now, and I set it in the blending modes, which we haven't done for a while since our cartoon exercise. I set it to overlay mode. And that basically, because it's middle gray, it does absolutely nothing. But if I dodge and burn, if I lighten and darken on that middle gray, like right now I'll use the burn tool on the midtones at 13%, with a nice soft brush. I can burn in the shadow in little areas, and it will affect all the pixels behind it, which happen to be the landscape. See? So an overlay layer is a beautiful thing. I can also dodge that landscape and brighten it up in the midtones. If there's something I want to work with. So that's a great way to dodge and burn, where you can actually just turn it off so that you keep all of your character elements together all in one place. Okay, so now I've got the shadow. Yeah, it looks pretty strong. I've got the lighting, I've got the placement, I've got the overlapping. Now I need to work with the color, right? Because he looks like he's lit in a slightly different temperature, more purples. So what I'm going to do is make an adjustment of his color balance, just like we've done with other elements. And I'm going to push more reds into him, more yellows, maybe a little bit more greens to counter all of that purpleness. And his highlights, a little bit more red, a little bit more green in his highlights. And his shadows, also a little bit of red, a little bit of yellow, a little bit of green. Okay, so that's the color temperature. And what kind of difference did that make? Well, it turned it from being this kind of blue and purple warrior into being this warmly lit. But he's still too bright, and his colors are too intense. So now we can go back to hue saturation on our character this time and just take his saturation down, make him a little less intense. Even though he has glowing bits, you want his armor to be believable in this setting. And I can also just dim all of his highlights a little, so he's not so brightly lit because we have so much atmosphere going on. And if I don't like how kind of greenish a lot of his yellows are, or on the verge, I can just knock the hue back a little bit. That will take him more into the oranges. So that's looking pretty good. So that was just saturation. Can make a big difference in integrating your character, no matter how they look. All right, now we can start building atmosphere in. What atmosphere makes sense? Well, some atmosphere at his feet, some atmosphere in the mid-ground. That looks good. But then I might need to move him above some of it. And if I move him above that mid-ground atmosphere, then I need to put the foreground atmosphere in front of him. Then I need to put the rock in front of him as well. And you just start stacking these things up. Now lastly, here's my character. Most of it's looking really good. If I want the shadow to be stronger, I can double it up by duplicating it. And then just taking its opacity down a little bit more. Or just by increasing its opacity in the first place. That's working well. I can also dodge and burn on the character to bring out certain edges. Like the back of this shield feels like maybe it should catch a little bit more light. So I'll dodge the edge of that shield now. And I can change the intensity of the lighting on the character. But I can't really change its direction so much. I can just broaden it, but help that shield really stand out. Help this gun catch the light by using the dodge tool. And because it's so nicely cut out, this is easy to do. Then I might make his legs a little bit darker, so I can burn those. Just the midtones. So they feel like they're in the shadow. The back arm. Okay, so now I've got my character. He's in the setting. I can decide how much of these texture fills I really want to use. Now with this kind of cosmic night, it feels maybe a little bit more appropriate to have this starlight around. But it's going to affect him just like it affects the background, right? If I don't want it to affect him so much, I can maybe softly erase it where it overlaps him at low opacities. Now what if I want something really dramatic and I want to add a texture fill? Well, I go back to Google Images and now I'm going to look for a small dust cloud to put at his feet. And actually, let's not even go for dust cloud. Let's just go for cloud. We're going to be looking at these with the next assignment a lot. Larger than 6 megapixels, maybe that's too large. Maybe I just want it a reasonable size. This looks like a nice one. And this is going to be the cloud that kicks up at his feet. Whoops. To turn the texture fill off before I can drag other elements. So even though the light's going this way, I want it to feel like the wind's going this way and this is going to kick up around his feet. So first, what do? I'm going to select all this blue with the magic wand. Get rid of it. Delete. I'm going to select all around the edges. Actually, no, never mind. Yeah, I will. I'll select all around the edges and I'll refine the edge. Shift the edge, feather it, maybe not that much. Not that much. And then delete it to get all those sharp edges out of the cloud. Maybe a little bit more is needed. So do it again. Delete again. All right, now put it at his feet. I can warp it, I can distort it, have it billow up. Needs to go under the rock, of course. And I don't want it to look like the Roadrunner suddenly coming to a stop. So I overlay it, or soft light, or probably pin light. And then I play with its opacity. And then I'll play with its color. Just like every other element, just like a texture fill. And then I'll use my eraser and bite away from its edges. So a selective texture fill that's kind of created by his feet kicking the dust.